Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful Gossips 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It's strange how a single winter afternoon can carry the weight of an entire lifetime, how a few soft breaths, a trembling confession, and a father's final attempt to make peace can send shockwaves through a family already stretched thin by secrets, betrayals, and buried wounds that no one wanted to acknowledge, not even the man who built an empire on elegance, discipline, and perfection. That was the atmosphere surrounding Eric Forrester that day, the day he called his entire family together for what would become his most difficult goodbye, the final gathering he would orchestrate with the kind of poise only he possessed. And yet, beneath that calm exterior, there was fear, raw, unfiltered fear, not for his own life, which he had accepted was nearing its end, but for the truth he knew he had to speak before he took his final breath. For decades, Eric had been the solid foundation of the Forrester family, the man who stood steady through storms involving infidelity, custody battles, business wars, lost children, returned children, and love triangles that continued to haunt them from generation to generation. But what no one knew, what he had carefully locked inside himself, was the one secret he swore he would never reveal, the one truth he believed would destroy the fragile unity the Forresters had left. Yet here they were, gathered in the living room of the mansion, unaware that they were seconds away from hearing the confession that would rewrite everything they believed about themselves, their relationships, and the family they had fought so fiercely to protect. Ridge was the first to notice something strange in Eric's tone. He had heard his father speak countless times, during board meetings, fashion reveals, holiday gatherings, and private heart-to-heart conversations, but never like this. There was a heaviness, a finality, an unmistakable sense of closure in the way Eric addressed each of them, his voice gentle yet trembling as if it carried the weight of an entire history on the verge of crumbling. Brooke, standing beside Ridge with a mixture of anxiety and intuition, placed her hand on his arm, sensing that whatever Eric was about to say wasn't another business update, health report, or sentimental farewell. It was bigger. Much bigger. Steffi, Finn, Thomas, Hope, Donna, Katie, Bridget, Thorne, and even Zend, all of them felt something shift as Eric struggled to compose himself. He looked at each of their faces as though memorizing them, as though preparing himself to let go. The room grew unbearably still, the air thick, almost suffocating, as if every breath they took echoed against the walls of the mansion that had witnessed every major turning point in their lives. And then, with a soft, unsteady inhale, Eric finally revealed the truth he had buried for decades, truth so powerful, so earth-shattering, that even Ridge, a man who had weathered countless shocks, felt his knees weaken. Eric revealed that the greatest lie the family ever told was one he had orchestrated himself, one he believed would protect them, shield them, and preserve the legacy he devoted his life to building. But the truth was far more devastating than any of them could have imagined. Eric confessed that long before any of them were born, during a period of weakness, confusion, and emotional turmoil, he made a choice that changed the course of the family's history. A choice involving a child. A child no one knew existed. A child who should have been part of the Forrester lineage but was erased from their story before they ever had a chance to know him. The confession hit the room like a physical blow. Gasps echoed. Eyes widened. And Ridge, who always believed he was the son who knew his father best, felt something inside him splinter. Eric continued, his voice breaking, as he explained that this secret child, a son born from a relationship he never disclosed, was taken from him before he even had the chance to hold him. The circumstances were complicated, painful, and wrapped in shame he carried quietly for decades while raising the children he loved more than anything. He revealed that the woman involved was someone the family once knew, someone connected to a time of emotional turmoil, and someone Eric believed would never forgive him for the choices he made. He explained that the child's existence was covered up by those who feared what the truth would do to the Forrester name, and in the end, he allowed himself to be convinced it was better to let the secret die. But secrets never really die in the Forrester family. They linger. They grow roots. They creep into the decisions, fears, and reactions that define each generation. Eric explained that guilt shadowed him throughout his life, influencing the way he raised Ridge, Thorne, Kristen, Felicia, and Bridget. He admitted that his fear of losing another child made him overprotective, controlling, sometimes unfair. He confessed that he judged them harshly at times not because he didn't love them, but because he was terrified that if he didn't enforce structure, control, and expectation, something unthinkable would happen again. Donna stood frozen, tears streaking down her cheeks, as she listened to the man she adored unravel before her. She wanted to hold him, to tell him that none of this mattered, that the past was the past. But Eric wasn't done. He explained that this unnamed son's existence was the hardest burden he ever carried. And the worst part, he admitted, was that he allowed himself to believe that silence was the best way to protect the family, even if it meant sacrificing his own chance at forgiveness. When Eric's voice finally cracked, the room shifted again. This time not with shock, but with heartbreak. Ridge stepped forward, his voice trembling, demanding the truth he felt he deserved. Who was he? What happened to him? He asked, his tone raw, vulnerable, almost childlike, a far cry from the confident, authoritative designer who ruled Forrester Creations with his father's approval. Eric, with tears pooling in his tired eyes, confessed that he didn't know what became of the child. He explained that the information was kept from him, hidden by people who believed the child's existence would destroy him, ruin his reputation, and expose mistakes that could shake the entire Forrester dynasty. That revelation landed like a punch to the chest. For a moment, no one could speak. Even Thomas, usually eager to dissect every truth, every lie, every piece of scandalous material that could shift the family dynamic, was silent. Finn took Steffi's hand, grounding her as she fought back tears, the weight of the moment too heavy to fully comprehend. Hope looked at Ridge and then back at Eric, trying to process the idea that the man who had been the moral compass of their family, flawed but good, had been carrying a pain none of them ever suspected. Eric continued, confessing that the guilt of losing a child he never met shaped every relationship he ever had. He admitted that his fear of repeating that mistake caused distance, misunderstandings, and emotional damage that rippled throughout the family, including his relationship with Ridge, who spent decades fighting for approval he didn't realize his father was too broken to fully give. Ridge stumbled back slightly, shaken by the realization that the pain he carried from his father's cold moments, his distance, and his occasional harshness may have been rooted not in disappointment, but in fear of failing again, fear of losing another child, fear of allowing history to repeat itself. For the first time in his life, Ridge saw his father not as the powerful patriarch, not as the untouchable fashion icon, but as a man, fallible, wounded, and haunted by decisions made long before Ridge took his first breath. The confession continued to unravel as Eric explained that his recent health crisis changed everything for him. Facing death made him confront the one truth he had never had the courage to speak aloud, the truth he believed he needed to share before leaving this world. He explained that while he could accept his illness, he couldn't accept leaving behind a family built on a lie, built on silence. He wanted them to know the truth not because he expected forgiveness, but because he needed them to understand him, to see him as the man behind the legend, behind the designer, behind the patriarchal image he worked so hard to maintain. Donna clung to his arm, sobbing quietly, while Katie covered her mouth in shock, unable to imagine a world where Eric suffered like this in silence. Bridget moved closer to her father, her medical training slipping away as raw emotion took over. She whispered softly that he didn't have to do this, that he didn't need to carry this alone, but Eric shook his head, insisting that the truth had lived in his heart too long to die with him. The most haunting moment came when Eric admitted he had spent years searching for answers, quietly, secretly, through private investigators, discreet connections, and old acquaintances who once knew the truth. But every lead was a dead end. Every attempt to uncover the fate of his son led nowhere. And eventually, he forced himself to stop, to accept that some wounds were never meant to heal, some truths never meant to be uncovered. The room erupted into fresh waves of emotion. Steffi, who had always admired her grandfather's resilience, felt shattered by the vulnerability he displayed. She whispered that they could help him search, that they could find the truth together, but Eric smiled sadly, telling her that it was too late for that. He didn't want them chasing ghosts after he was gone. He wanted them to move forward, not backward. He wanted them to protect the Forrester legacy, not tarnish it with a scandal that would resurface every time they sought the answers he once desperately pursued. But the final blow came when Eric revealed the true reason he pushed himself so hard in recent months, designing, fighting, and clinging to life even as his body weakened. He admitted that his recent creative surge wasn't driven solely by passion, it was driven by desperation. He wanted to leave something behind for the child he never knew, the child who might still be out there, unaware of the legacy he was born into. He confessed that every design, every sketch, every stitch carried a piece of that hidden grief. Donna clutched his hand, tears soaking her cheeks, whispering that none of this changed who he was. But Eric disagreed. He believed the truth would change everything, how they saw him, how they remembered him, how they understood the family's legacy. And perhaps, he admitted quietly, that was what terrified him the most. When his voice began to falter, Ridge moved closer, lowering himself to his father's level. For the first time in years, maybe decades, he spoke to Eric not as a son desperate for approval, not as a business partner, not as a designer fighting for dominance, but as a man who finally saw the truth behind every cold glance, every harsh word, every impossible expectation. Ridge whispered, voice trembling, that he forgave him. Before Eric could protest, Ridge added something else, something that shocked even him. He said he was grateful. Grateful that Eric trusted them enough to share this before it was too late. Grateful that he no longer had to carry this alone. The others echoed that sentiment, each offering forgiveness in their own broken, emotional way. The family, fractured and complicated as they were, gathered around the patriarch they loved, creating a circle of warmth, unity, and understanding that Eric had always dreamed of but never believed he would witness in his final days. But the true shock came after Eric's last breath, when Ridge found a sealed envelope tucked beneath Eric's sketchpad, an envelope labeled simply, "For when I am gone." Inside was a letter. A final message. A final set of instructions. A confession within the confession. It revealed the name of the woman Eric once loved, and a clue. A name. A location. A possibility that the lost Forrester child wasn't lost at all. And with that final revelation, Ridge realized Eric hadn't told them the full truth. He hadn't confessed everything. His final words weren't spoken aloud, they were written on paper, waiting to ignite a new chapter the Forresters never expected. And that is where the real story begins, because Eric's last words didn't just shock everyone. They changed everything. The air in the mansion felt different the moment Ridge slid the letter from the envelope, as if even the quiet corners of the Forrester home understood that whatever was written inside those fragile pages was about to tear through the entire foundation of the family. The house that once echoed with parties, fashion shows, arguments, reconciliations, and countless memories suddenly felt hollow, waiting, listening, almost bracing itself for the storm that Eric's final words had left behind. Ridge stood frozen, staring down at the neat handwriting he recognized instantly, his father's elegant, practiced script, the same handwriting that had signed millions of dollars worth of contracts, love notes, design sketches, and Christmas cards over the decades. But this letter, this one, was unlike anything Eric had ever written. Ridge could feel it before he even opened it. Donna watched from a distance, her hands trembling against her chest, desperate to move closer yet unable to force her feet to take a single step toward the truth she both feared and needed. Brooke, standing at Ridge's side, placed a hand against his back, grounding him even as her own heart pounded with dread. Steffi, Thomas, Hope, Finn, Bridget, Thorne, Zend, and Katie, all of them silently formed a half-circle around Ridge, as if instinctively drawn toward the final thread of Eric's legacy. And with one slow breath, Ridge opened the letter. At first, there was only silence, long, suffocating silence, as Ridge's eyes moved across the page. His chest rose and fell unevenly, the muscles in his jaw tightening as his father's voice came alive through ink. Eric's words were raw, personal, and painfully specific. They were not meant to be heard while he was still alive, because he feared, no, he knew, they would change everything. For several excruciating seconds, Ridge said nothing. He simply read. Then reread. Then lowered the letter slightly, staring ahead but seeing nothing. Steffi's voice broke first, soft, fragile. "Dad, what does it say?" Ridge looked up, his eyes red, his throat tightening as he struggled to form words. "The letter," he explained, "wasn't just a message. It wasn't just a confession. It was a map, a starting point, a final plea." Eric had left the name of the woman connected to his lost son. A woman none of them had expected. A woman whose name had not been spoken in the Forrester home in decades. The moment Ridge said the name, barely above a whisper, the room reacted like it had been hit by lightning. Donna gasped. Brooke's hand flew to her mouth. Thorne staggered backward. Bridget's eyes filled instantly with tears. Even Thomas, who prided himself on keeping composure in the face of chaos, felt his breath catch. The woman Eric named was someone from his past the family believed had disappeared from their lives forever, someone tied to a painful chapter, a scandal long buried, a storyline the family had collectively agreed never to revisit. Eric explained in his letter that decades ago, during a time when his marriage was falling apart, he sought comfort in someone who understood him in a way he hadn't been understood in years. Their connection was brief but emotional, a spark that came at the wrong time, in the wrong place, under the weight of too many bad decisions. The woman had left abruptly, claiming she was moving on with her life, but what Eric never knew, what he only learned years later through a whispered confession, was that she had been pregnant when she left. She never told him until after the child had already been taken from her by people who believed the child's existence would ruin both of their lives. That woman had disappeared soon after, leaving no forwarding address, no explanation, no closure. But now, in his final days, Eric had finally gathered the courage to reveal her name to Ridge and the rest of the family. Brooke was the first to find her voice. "Eric should have told us," she whispered, though even she wasn't sure if her words were anger, grief, or disbelief. Donna's tears fell faster as she whispered that Eric probably stayed silent because he didn't want to hurt them, because he didn't want to tarnish the family's legacy, because he didn't want to uproot the stability he spent decades fighting to maintain. Bridget shook her head slowly, as if trying to piece together a puzzle she had no hope of completing. She stepped closer to Ridge, gently touching the letter as though drawn to it. That contact seemed to finally break Ridge's paralysis. His voice cracked as he revealed the second shocking detail of the letter. Not only had Eric finally named the woman, but he had also left a clue regarding the child's possible identity. A city. A hospital. A name, not a full name, but part of one. It was just enough to lead them somewhere. Just enough to tear apart the piece they barely had. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Steffi demanded they follow the clue immediately, insisting that Eric must have wanted them to search for the missing Forrester. Thomas's mind spun with possibilities, dark theories, and what-ifs, his instincts firing at full capacity as he considered how such a revelation would shake the family tree, and Forrester Creations itself. Zend wiped his eyes, overwhelmed by the idea that somewhere out there, a cousin he never knew might be living an ordinary life, completely unaware of the dynasty he was biologically tied to. Thorne looked both devastated and furious, pacing the room as he muttered that this revelation could destroy everything: inheritance, leadership, the company, the line of succession, legal battles, emotional implosions, everything. Katie reached for Donna and pulled her into a hug, whispering that Eric clearly wanted peace, not chaos, that whatever they decided to do next had to be handled together. But Ridge was silent. That silence made everyone still. Ridge wasn't just the co-CEO or the eldest son. He was the one who had spent his entire life believing he understood Eric better than anyone. He was the one who sought his father's approval more desperately than he ever admitted. He was the one who had been shaped, scarred, most by Eric's fear, guilt, and unspoken trauma. And now, realizing that his father's coldness, expectations, and emotional distance had roots far deeper than he ever imagined, Ridge felt something inside him fracture. He felt robbed of understanding, robbed of truth, robbed of a relationship he might have had if Eric had trusted him earlier. Brooke stepped closer, whispering his name, but Ridge didn't respond. Instead, he walked toward Eric's drawing table, his sanctuary, the place where he poured his soul into fabrics and sketches, and placed the letter gently on top of it. He stared down at his father's final words, his emotions swirling in a brutal storm. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse and heavy. He didn't want us to find him. Or maybe he didn't think we should. That statement triggered a new wave of debate. Steffi argued fiercely that Eric must have wanted them to know the truth, otherwise he wouldn't have written the letter. Thomas countered that maybe Eric wanted Ridge to decide, not the entire family. Donna, emotional and trembling, insisted that Eric's heart had always been torn between love and fear, and that whatever he intended, he wanted his children to have the choice he never had. Bridget wiped her tears and gently reminded everyone that they had just lost their father. Emotions were raw. Minds clouded. Hearts devastated. She begged them not to turn Eric's final confession into a war zone. Her plea worked, momentarily. The room fell silent again. Ridge closed his eyes, letting the reality wash over him. Not only was he mourning the loss of his father, but now he was grappling with the knowledge that somewhere in the world, he might have a brother he had never met, someone who carried Eric's blood, Eric's legacy, Eric's features, Eric's dreams. Someone who had lived an entire lifetime without the family that should have embraced him from birth. Ridge opened his eyes again, and when he spoke, his voice was soft but steady. We'll go through the letter. We'll follow the clues. But we do this carefully. Quietly. And together. His choice of words brought visible relief to some and fresh anxiety to others. Steffi immediately declared she would help lead the search. Thomas nodded, already mentally preparing to dive into databases, records, and old archives. Brooke placed a hand on Ridge's arm, telling him she would support him no matter what. Donna broke down again, whispering that she wished Eric were still alive to see how much love his family still held for him, even now, even after everything. But even as the family united, fear lingered. Finn voiced the question no one else dared to speak aloud: what if the child doesn't want to be found? The thought sliced through the room like a knife. Hope, wide-eyed, whispered another haunting possibility: what if the child doesn't know the truth at all? What if their life changes in a way they never asked for? And then Thomas added the darkest possibility of all: we don't even know if he's alive. The devastating reality settled over them like a heavy fog. Eric's final confession hadn't just rewritten their past, it had opened a door to a future more uncertain than anything the Forresters had faced in their decades of scandal, heartbreak, and redemption. As the night stretched on, the family slowly dispersed through the mansion, each pulled by their own grief. Donna sat at Eric's piano, touching the keys he had once played with such joy. Brooke retreated to the terrace, staring into the Los Angeles skyline, whispering Eric's name like a prayer. Steffi collapsed onto the sofa, clutching Finn's arm as she tried to process the magnitude of everything that had happened. Hope held Thomas's hand, grounding him as his mind spun with 1,000 unanswered questions. Thorne stepped outside, needing air, needing distance, needing something, anything, to make sense of the revelation that shattered the only truth he had ever known about his father. But Ridge remained in the living room, standing before Eric's drawing table, the letter illuminated by the soft glow of the nearby lamp. He touched the edge of the paper, his fingers trembling as he whispered into the empty room. "Dad, why didn't you trust me?" His voice cracked on the last word, and he lowered his head, his shoulders shaking. In that moment, Ridge wasn't a designer, a leader, or a headstrong Forrester. He was a son mourning the father he loved more deeply than he ever expressed. A son who desperately wished for one more conversation, one more chance, one more moment of truth between them. But there was no more time. No more chances. No more words. Only Eric's final confession, and the clue that would soon send the Forrester family into a journey none of them were prepared for. As Ridge closed the letter and pressed it against his chest, he whispered a quiet promise to his father: "I'll find him. I don't know how, but I will. I owe you that. And I owe it to him."